A very good morning to our esteemed partners, guests, and friends who have joined us virtually as well as physically here at Bridge Plus 79 Robinson Road, Singapore today. Welcome to the Bridge Plus FinTech Odyssey, an annual showcase organized by Bridge Plus as part of our participation in the Singapore FinTech Festival Innovation Lab Crawl. An enabler of the fintech community, we have hosted and curated fintech events over the years and have planned our signature FinTech Odyssey in collaboration with our members and partners to showcase their latest innovations and breakthroughs related to the sector. The overarching theme this year is on the fintech impact. This is the start of 2 days jam-packed with activities that we have planned in conjunction with our members and partners and will include panel discussions, pitching sessions, and keynote speakers. We would also like to take this opportunity to announce that we have signed an MOU with Alivandi, a non-profit organization set up by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the good people behind the Singapore FinTech Festival. As such, Alivandi will be moving into Bridge Plus, and we cannot be happier to have hosted the Singapore FinTech Festival at Bridge Plus over the last few days. For the uninitiated, Bridge Plus is CapitaLand's flexible workspace and community platform, spanning across 7 cities in Asia, including Shanghai and Bangalore. We first launched in Singapore Science Park in October 2017 and have become host to enterprises like Rev by AXA, the FinLab by UOB, as well as CapitaLand tenants Shopee, Johnson & Johnson, and Dyson. 79 Robinson Road is the newest addition to our Bridge Plus family, having opened its doors earlier this year to welcome members such as the Bank of International Settlements, Innovation Hub, Tribe, and other fast-growing companies. Our community vision is to develop 79 Robinson Road into a destination at the center of the CBD of Singapore, where international fintech communities can gather regularly to confer and collaborate as a community. We do so through our community development initiatives and thoughtful event-driven content programming to bring people together to make great things happen. We invite like-minded leaders and professionals who have an interest to contribute and give back to the community to co-locate and collaborate with us. Whether you are a leading enterprise setting up an innovation lab or a startup scaling up for growth in the region today in today's fast-paced environment, we provide the community you need to help you succeed. If you are interested to take a look at our space, do join us for a tour at the end of this session later. We are honored to have your participation and look forward to an exciting day of thought leadership. We are amid some very unusual times, but are thankful nevertheless to be able to continue having this yearly event for the continuous sharing and learning with our community. In light of the current measures, please make sure to be masked at all times and to maintain safe distancing. To begin today's program, we would like to invite Mr. Chew Pit Man, Managing Director, Investment and Development at CapitaLand Development Singapore, to come on stage for the opening speech. Without further ado, let's put our hands together to invite Mr. Chew on the stage. Mr. Chew, please.
Hello. Hi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you and welcome. Thank you for being here today, either physically or virtually for this event held at Bridge Plus 79 Robinson Road, or 79RR for short. As you may know, Bridge Plus is a co-working platform owned by CapitaLand. And as the name Bridge Plus suggests, we aim not only to create quality, flexible workspace, but we also hope to activate these spaces by curating meaningful events that can bring the business community together. And for this particular co-working space at 79 Robinson Road, we had this value proposition to create a vibrant fintech hub in the CBD. That was, this center started operating in January this year. And fast forward to 11 months today, we are pleased to have more than 260 fintech professionals working out of 79 Robinson Road. And we had also formed meaningful working relationships with the MAS, with the FinTech Association, the FinTech, many other partners. In fact, over the past 3 days, we are pleased to be a partner to Elevandi, to be the official venue for delivering the Singapore FinTech Festival. Now, if you were to ask us as a curator of space, what it means to have vibrancy, I think one of the key insights or takeaway that we will have is that vibrancy cannot be top-down driven. There must be a ground-up kind of an effort, a ground-up enthusiasm, and even a ground-up direction in order for that vibrancy to be sustainable, in order for that vibrancy to be real, and in order for that vibrancy to be inspiring. And that's why we are very pleased to introduce this edition of the Bridge Plus FinTech Odyssey at 79 Robinson Road. The previous editions were actually held in our co-working space in Singapore Science Park in the Ascent. And every single session that we have today at the FinTech Odyssey is actually a ground-up initiative. Every single session was conceptualized and produced by our FinTech members or our FinTech partners. And so we are very, very pleased to be part of this initiative. And we do hope that you will enjoy all these events and just sit back and enjoy the sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chew. Next, we would like to invite our guest of honor, Mr. Supnandu Mohanty, Chief FinTech Officer of the MES and Chairman of the Board at Elevandi, to come on stage for his speech. Mr. Supnandu, in his role at MES, is responsible for creating development strategies and regulatory policies around technology innovation to better manage risks, enhance efficiency, and strengthen competitiveness in the financial sector. As Chairman of the Board at Elevandi, we will also be taking a photo to commemorate the MOU signing between Bridge Plus and Elevandi after his speech. Without further ado, let's put our hands together to invite Mr. Mohanty onto the stage. Mr. Mohanty, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Well, we're still coming out of 3 days, so a bit of a what you call in cricket called blank mind or brain fading. That's what they say in cricket. Your brain fades and you don't really process much as you think through this day. Well, I want to thank Bridge Plus to start with, that this venue has been really good for us. And despite being a small space, we could create an atmosphere of networking and connection. And it truly worked well for us. The content was well done on top of this lovely venue we had. It's nice, small, but not meaningful. So the role you all played in this whole event is something we all truly appreciate. Second, over the last 3 days, we all going to take a pause. We get time to watch those content. But in between, I did manage to catch some content. And the most striking insights to me was one by, on the last day, yesterday morning, when the Olam CEO, Sunny Verghese, was talking about sustainability. And he made a remark saying that world was ignoring all the likelihood of virus coming. And we came to a stage we were forced to change our behavior, and we lost $10 trillion of economy, and we couldn't do much about it. And what he was trying to say, that there's enough signals to say that climate change is real and it will happen. And if we do not move and act individually or corporates, it will be much bigger impact, and we have no choice but to change our behavior. So I think it was a huge takeaway from me, because I almost could relate that nobody anticipated us holding masks, safe distancing, constrained travel. It was just forced on us. We had no choice. And there was no policy to get ready for this. So like this, sustainability, green, climate is going to be a big part of our narrative for next 2-3 years. I would strongly encourage fintech companies to focus on that, because that is going to make a meaningful impact to the industry. So any fintech, in whatever form you are, do think about how you can contribute to the climate change sustainability agenda we have as you work with the businesses and serve them. The second profound impact on me was day 2, when I was watching Mike Shinoda's interview. And one line he made, which I thought was very provocative: we are tired of getting monetized day and night, whether where we put our data, put our pictures, whether we are a creative artist, whoever we are just tired of getting monetized every time we stand up, speak, discuss, post, write anything on public space. Time has come to get rid of that and start have a meaningful one-to-one relationship on a virtual world. And that's what is explaining the whole space of NFT, Web 3.0. I think that's something I think we got to have to think seriously, that the role institutions play between us as we interact as human beings, how much of that are relevant with the power of technology we have. And that's all the DeFi's and smart contracts, all the complex stuff comes in. And the third impact on me was my own interaction with Balaji and the opening. And well, there are many technical talks he gave in that dinner discussion. I think all of you will take time to process, because I was myself struggling to process what you're saying. But one thing stuck to me, my own question to him, that in the internet world of 1.0 and 2.0, we didn't have to worry about CPU, TCP/IP protocol, the complex underlying technology architecture, network connections. We just went to internet, used it, and we take for granted all the complex engineering which happens below it. And I asked this question, not only for us, but for the generation coming. Do they have to educate themselves in a very different way? Because to participate in a new Web 3.0 internet, the level of education required is much higher. We got to educate ourselves how to be the node in that internet. Today, we are not the node. We are using somebody's server's machine to connect and interact. In the Web 3.0, we are the node. We are the creator of content. You are the producer of content. We are monetizing our own creativity, which means we need to operate the features, the products, and the machines which we are going to be in charge of. So how do we educate ourselves? And that to me is a big takeaway, because we are not ready for that world. And I think all of us have to start learning the power of Web 3.0, how to use it, how to process these things. Of course, as part of the Singapore FinTech Festival, we just created almost out of nowhere a certification program, which allows all of you to watch the SFF and come back and take those 90 questions. Well, getting a certificate is a fun, but what we attempted to do, that through that process, you should be able to get a first basic understanding of Web 3.0. I strongly encourage every one of us here to go and take this exam. Do not dismiss it thinking that you know. I can tell you, when you take that exam, you will feel bad about yourself, how much you don't know. So please go and take it. Do not think that you know enough of internet. And this is only basics, 101, maybe less than 101. That is a struggle. So go and take that exam, who are watching us, because that will truly help you to understand the basics, and you don't have to tell the world that you don't know. So good way to get your skills upgraded. And lastly, I think as a community, as we're coming out of pandemic, we should start connecting. And I hope Bridge Plus plays a good role in connecting us back and come back to offices with some self-distancing, I hope, and be back to normal, but be more responsible. And that's the only way we can come back to normalcy. So don't take things for granted as you come back to workplace, as government opens up the process. So with that optimism and that hope of responsibility, I wish all of us a good luck for next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mohanty, for that very earnest sharing of the Web 3.0. I'm sure after this, there'll be a surge in applications for the exams. Now, we would like to invite Mr. Mohanty back on stage, as well as Mr. Chew Pitman, as well as Mr. Edmund Ng, Vice President, Flexible Workspace at CapitaLand Development Singapore, and Mr. Pat Patel, General Manager at Alivandi, to come on stage for a photo-taking session to commemorate the MOU signing between Bridge Plus and Alivandi. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. We now have the panel discussion where Mr. Mohanty, Mr. Varun Mittal, author of Singapore, the FinTech Nation, and Mr. Alex Manson of SC Ventures will be sharing on the future of digital banking and digital banks. This panel will be moderated by Mr. Bernard Su, Chief Executive of the FinTech Academy. Let's put our hands together for the panel, please. Thank you.
Right, a very good morning to everyone here present in 79R and those tuning in from your laptops at home to join us with this panel discussion today on the future of digital banking and digital bank. And first of all, before we start, I'd like to thank Bridge Plus for letting us hold this panel discussion here in 79R. Thanks a lot. I'm Bernard Su, Chief Executive of FinTech Academy and your moderator this morning. So as we all know, there are 4 digital banks that's been approved and will be coming next year. And once again, raising the bar of competition in the financial industry. And today we have invited 3 special guests here, 3 gentlemen, to join us in this panel discussion to discuss about the dynamics of banking with the introduction of digital-only banks. And with the fintechs that's already here in the ecosystems today. And as the MC have introduced, we have 3 panel speakers here. Mr. Subnendo Mohanty, Chief FinTech Officer, MAS, also intimately known as Chief in the Singapore FinTech landscape, so I'll be calling him Chief later on. And Mr. Varun Mittal, author of Singapore, the FinTech Nation, and we have Mr. Alex Mason here, SC Ventures. So gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time, your precious time here to share your insights on the future of digital banking and digital banks. First questions, Chief. When MAS introduced the digital bank license, and you have awarded 4 digital bank license in December last year, what is the motivation from MAS to issue this digital bank license to retail banking, wholesale banking, considering that Singapore fintech industry is really quite robust at this juncture?
Process. what I was trying to say that what I'm trying to say that we don't have that infrastructure to allow all this to be digitally native. So after we implemented PayNow, after we allowed non-bank players to participate in NFIs participate in the payment trail, after the SyncPass became available for eKYC, after SG Fintech was available for connecting different participating banks to share the data, we thought it was opportune time to introduce digital bank, because then this new digital bank can truly be digitally native, because you don't need a bunch of paper to open a bank account. So that's one, timing wise, that's why it came last year, and now it's hopefully next year things will get rolled out. The second part was competition. I think it's important to create a very, I'll say, healthy competition within the regulated space, so that there is a challenger bank within the regulated constraint. And the third element is that the fintechs we developed in Singapore, but typically fintechs are going to help banks to digitize, and we need a captive market for them to be, for them to sell their product. And this digital bank, I hope, sincerely hope, do not try to have the delusion belief you can do it yourself. If you ever try that, I think you will be back like an incumbent bank. So I will strongly encourage anybody rolling out digital bank, talk to the fintechs, talk to them so that they can help you to plug in your own digital stack. So the best way to do is to partner with fintechs who can help you to digitize in a cheaper, in agile way. And so we have to develop that fintech market so that they're ready to be plugged into the digital bank. So that bit of a history, nuance to the timing and why it was created, and why it is now relevant to us more than ever.
I see. Thanks, Chief. Yeah, by introducing all these digital banks into this ecosystem, I mean, we mentioned about partnering fintechs together, healthy competition. How do you envision the dynamics, between digital-only banks, digital banking, and the whole financial industry? I mean, besides the competition-wise, how do you think that it might evolve?
Make money.
That's a good point.
Is that a question? Sorry.
Yeah. By introducing the digital banks only into the ecosystems, how do you envision the dynamics between digital banking, digital-only banks, and in the whole financial industry?
Maybe you should ask the question to Varun.
Yeah, Varun. I'm intending to ask you.
So the premise is this, right? In addition to what Chief said, there were social fabric change in the country, which doesn't get a lot of focus. Singapore has about 400,000 gig economy workers. And as per, if I look at regulations, if you are earning less than $35,000, you cannot get bank credit. And these customers, they probably may earn that much, but the traditional definition of how do you earn is a pay slip. Mm-hmm. And these people are earning from a Grab, a Gojek, a Shopee, a Food Panda, even property agents. So when these 400,000 people are earning and they don't have CPF because they don't have an employer, so you need new financial service providers, mm-hmm. the platforms from which their livelihood is originating. And the premise is, it's not a one-stop takes all. I eat one kind of food doesn't mean I don't eat another kind of food. And if you look at average Singaporean bank account is more than one. Average tenure of a Singaporean in a job is 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. So even their salary account has a potential to change every 2.5 years. And average Singaporean has more than one bank accounts. So it's not the question of that. Mm-hmm. And also different banks will have different capabilities to serve you. You may have a basic bank account from a ride-sharing platform you're working with, or an online sales platform where you're working. But for your mortgage, which is a very different need, you will probably want to go with a different player who can have long liabilities and capabilities and stuff. So the premise is the perception of it's a winner takes all is not true. And if that was the case, we would not have these many banks. And we would not have 21 people queue up to apply for these licenses. And there are 4 licenses new awarded, but you probably missed out. There was a 5th one, which is the internet-only bank. Mm-hmm. And Alex is probably better suited to talk. And Singapore was a pioneer on that. Mm. Before all this stuff which Chief said would happen, 1999, Singapore was the first country in the world to create an internet-only bank framework. This is before your smartphones happened. This is in the dial-up generation. The thesis was at Singaporean regulatory leadership visualized even in 1999 before .com that there will be a time people will be digitally self-servicing and capabilities needs to be there. And the infra was there from that perspective. And it was wonderful that Standard Chartered came in at that point to work with and as Alex can go deeper, with a player like NTUC to build it from the ground up. So we have to also look at from a social fabric and how society has changed from this perspective.
Agree. Thanks, Alex.
I'll I'll just build on that. Thanks for the pass. It's obviously echo everything you said. The point you're making is a point about business models, right? So you start with needs of society, meaning needs of clients, and evolve into business models. The point of digital banks is it's a different business model from what conventional banks have historically done. Conventional banks are doing a pretty decent job covering certain needs with certain clients today. And in fact, I would argue that Singapore didn't need to digitize conventional banks more than they are digital. They're pretty good banks. I can think of other markets where that's not the case. But I think the level of digitization in Singapore, notwithstanding all the things that the Chief just said, is which had to be done in the last few years, is pretty high. However, a number of needs in society aren't very well addressed by the financial industry at large, and banks in particular. And in order to address them, what's required is actually less a digital channel, although that goes without saying, and a different business model. So when building digital banks, it's really about the model, you're going to approach clients, serve them in a different way, serve them the way they want and need to be served, as opposed to the conventional way. I think it also segues, if I can keep the mic for just a little longer, to back to your question about dynamics, which is the word you pronounced earlier is the word of an ecosystem. And essentially, what we're creating here is an ecosystem of different players, where different business models, be it the conventional ones or the new ones, will interact together. And very importantly, though, there's a whole lot of capabilities that are required for these business models to work. These capabilities are the fintechs all around them, right? And mind you, we talk about and media love to talk about sort of fintechs displacing banks and the competition between the two. In my experience and generally speaking, what we see in the market, 90% of fintechs are partners. Meaning, no, we're not trying to do this ourselves. Absolutely. Anytime there's a capability that somebody has and we don't need to try and reinvent or build ourselves, we'll import it. And so they're partnerships predominantly. And that set of partnerships, plugging into a digital bank, into a business model, that set of capabilities which we're importing for the purpose of serving clients in a different way, that's essentially the ecosystem we're building in town.
Thanks.
And also another change in the customer behavior is the traditional model of customer segmentation and customer tiering was based on branches. You don't have much money, you are this. Above this, you are premium, then priority, then privilege, and private. No obsession with the word P. Probably comes from some marketing playbook. And the premise was, if you look at the cost to actually serve, I mean, if you're giving a card, the card is same. Just because you make it black color or golden color doesn't actually change it. And the current generation is my Netflix same as the rich guy, my iPhone same as the rich guy, my Spotify same as the rich guy. Why you are putting labels on my head because you think what I'm worth?
Yeah, this is a very good point, which is the historical way to segment clients is long gone, right? So historical ways, are you poor, less poor, rich, stinking rich? It's and that means you'll be covered by different things. Or corporate bank covers big clients, retail bank covers individuals, and guess what happens to SME? They fall in the middle. And
it's a good point, Varun.
So very different ways to segment clients and needs going forward.
In fact, I was guilty of that. My role in banking last time was the head of proposition, and I segment clients by exactly what Varun just mentioned. So despite Singaporeans being very well banked, there's like what Chief has mentioned, there's a lot of underserved segments. There's all these digital-only banks and fintechs are covering, and bringing all this banking to democratizing it to everyone. But for Alex, that's interesting. One of the digital bank license, it's awarded to Standard Chartered Bank. And despite Standard Chartered having a very strong digital branch network, but Standard Chartered still chose to launch Mox in Hong Kong, and then in Singapore as well, a digital-only bank. What is the strategic intent behind this strategy?
So in a nutshell, one word: clients, right? Clients, what they expect, what they want, what they need, and addressing needs in a very different way. First, I'd say Hong Kong different from Singapore, different from Indonesia, different from every market. So every market's got different dynamics and different needs. And so while the technology stack is sometimes transportable, the client value proposition has to be, and in fact is in most cases, very different because the markets are very different. The point I was making earlier is Singapore wasn't actually really far behind in terms of digital channels. It's a pretty digitized economy by comparison, again, to lots of the markets in the world where we operate. However, and to the point of underserved clients, we aren't serving clients necessarily the way they want to be served. The business model alternative we're pursuing is, I'll try and summarize it in words. It's about embedding financial services into lifestyle. So it's about lifestyle. And in fact, when I talk to you every day, it's, what do you want? What do you need from bank? You'll talk to me about your lifestyle, your health, your benefits, your food, your savings, etc. And finance has to be a seamless experience which is embedded in lifestyle, as opposed to a separate silo that sort of you go to a branch in order to go and buy a financial product. And so the point of a different business model is to address that need completely differently.
Thanks. And I'm also curious about, because for Standard Chartered, right, the digital-only bank, and then there is digital banking. From a customer proposition standpoint, what would be the key differentiation between these two entities? Let's say for the Singapore crowd, is there anything specifically that's a key critical differentiator from a strategy standpoint?
Right, I should say to some extent, stay tuned, because we're still working on it, and they'll launch. But I alluded to it just now, right? Which is seamlessly embedding finance in people's lifestyle. With strong focus on health, strong focus on lifestyle. Obviously, food matters to you, matters to all of us, matters to me certainly, etc.
Okay, thanks so much. I didn't get it out of you, but yeah, lifestyle. Last year, besides the digital bank's license being announced, there is the SG Findex, also known as the Singapore Financial Data Exchange, Singapore's own open banking initiatives, right? How do you think, maybe from Varun, how do you think digital banking can tap on SG Findex to enhance their customer propositions, since you're on a conversation of customers?
See, the premise is SG Findex is trying to build a lot of aggregation in a much more, I would say, structured way. Unlike Europe, where the model was, here's a regulation, we have passed it, now you go figure out what this means. And everybody is running around trying to figure out what exactly is the implementation metrics of that. With Singapore, as we've talked about in the book as well, it's right first, fast later. There's proper structure framework of what data will come, what consent means, what revocation of consent means, who owns what data. So there has been a lot of, I would say, wonderful work done on that. But what I say, okay, what's next? Investments, insurance are coming, great. Why, if I look at compare like Findex versus Pay Now adoption? So one concern which customers face is, okay, if I do this, will people from banks start to call me and start to sell me more stuff? See, if you look at most banks, the challenge there is suddenly somebody will upgrade me from a segment A to B. Suddenly a proposition manager will bump me up and say, "Hola, this guy has so much money. our share of wallet of Varun is only this, we must look at increasing the share of wallet. So we have to be very cautious on what is a servicing call and what is a sales call, and how do we ensure that the customer can have it, but not have that data being used for he being targeted by the host bank.
And Alex, how about you? How is Standard Chartered Chief? Any thoughts around that, capitalizing on the open banking space?
Well, the way I would see this as the way we build SG Findex is built around something called you can only participate if you contribute. That's almost core to the SG Findex philosophy. It cannot be there's a bank, X bank called Challenger Bank, nothing to contribute, only to take, or a social media giant who only wants to take, nothing to give back. So if you want to participate in a SG Findex infrastructure, you must contribute. But that's fair, right? You can't, that's a level playing field that whatever I create, I give back to the common gateway. So all of us can share from each other's, if you truly believe customer is center of our thinking. And having that ability to see at a point of your choice, your whole financial holding is at least a good starting point. It will get better as we add new phases to that platform. We are adding insurers to that platform. We'll have, perhaps I hope one day we'll have private non-regulated player participating in that space. Of course, there's a way to do it. If you are smart enough, you can figure out. But I'll not say that. I'll let the industry figure out. We have left something to go. So I think it will be a thoughtful shift. In fact, one of the proponent of Web 3.0 is that data is caught up in silos, and the response to that is SG Findex. Let's try to, maybe in a way, strange way, try to protect the institution by allowing them to share the data, not get in within the trap of the institution. But I don't think that's the end of everything. This is a part of the journey. We have solved the payment problem. We have solved the KYC problem now, in terms of now we have perhaps partly solved the data access problem. But this is still an early stage. And I'm hoping as the digital banks come to play, they will create new demand for new services. I was listening to Varun and Alex, and I think technology works harder when we are going to serve underbanked. That's the only place. If you look at private bank technology today they're quite rudiment, because that's not the prime focus. But if you are going to create a banking services for underprivileged, you have to have the full power of AI. You have to have the full power of all the APIs. You have to have full power of highly agile system, scaled system, and the cost has to dramatically go down. So the technology engineers, the design engineers, the architect truly have to show their best element if we have to serve the under segment. So a bit of inverse when it comes to technology versus clientele. So the more remarkable technology achievement, more the product becomes accessible to more people. Spotify, all these things, they're all remarkable technology models, and it become available to all of us at level playing field because it was great technology.
That's a good point, Chief. In fact, just to share,
Alex has to say something.
Alex.
It's just terrific. I echo that, a point in your direction, because I think, obviously it's a societal debate where you have a huge role to play. And I think you pointed out earlier the infrastructure side of things, which is before you build infrastructure, there's no point having digital banks. Absolutely right. You have to build the pipes. So now we have some pipes, and we'll keep building them. And then there's a second phase, which is really the building principles of that ecosystem of data, right? So if you think of a data ecosystem, there's architectural principles which you're beginning to enumerate, and every society will reflect on it. We can see differences between the West, China, Asia, Europe, etc. already, and it's one of the most important things. If there's a land grab of data, you better do this with the heart in the right place, and with a firm intent to solve actual problems. And as you said, take, give back, and
In fact, I echo what Chief mentioned. Was in a local bank banking. I was the business lead for open banking, and we were building the tech folks, and I was representing business, and we have the tech folks building the tech and trying to hook up the API. At first, the senior management was seeing this SG Findex as a threat. Oh no, we're going to surrender all of data, especially coming from a local bank. It's like we think that we have more to lose, and we start cracking our heads, we do a SWOT analysis. We saw the threats, but at the same time, we saw that if we have the data from other banks, there's a lot of opportunity. And the next question was move on to how do we make clients surrender, like choose us as to be the bank to grant us data. And we spent a few months thinking how to create value for clients, and it's going to benefit clients.
You know, Bernard, I must share, when I was speaking to Balaji in my session, he said something remarkable. And I want all of you to just listen to this carefully. He said, Google, when they started, you know, the most powerful thing they did is they indexed all the information side by side. When you bring all the news of different news portals side by side, what happens? The one which is delivering bad news or less quality news, they get filtered out over a period of time. SG Findex actually going to do that. They're going to keep everything side by side, and you can clearly understand who is delivering a better product. So in a way, what Google did to news industry, they indexed all the news side by side. Then came private players who could do better news reporting, and they could beat the news channels, and progressively a lot of news channels became irrelevant. I think that's what happens when you bring everything together.
It's good. Yeah, the banks are just doing that. You know,
Yeah,
so worried.
I'm just waiting for some bank to say, I will also show you all the fees I'm charging in that one. I'm the first bank to do that. I would wait for a bank.
This hasn't happened, you know, that's what Google did. They indexed all the information in a single page, and people saw, okay, why this news house is reporting so poor quality news? I don't want to ask them anymore.
It's a good point. A lot of banks, they do enjoy when your time deposit crossover. No one's going to inform you. Then the bank will make 1-2 weeks of baud rate before you found out, and the clients will call complaining. Now imagine the next banker is going to call you to say your time deposit is going to be due.
In a strange way, it's called SG Findex.
But to Varun's point, it's you get better choice, you get transparency, right? So the level of information has to increase over time. That has to be the trend as a result of what's happening.
It's going to be very exciting for banking, and for consumers, we have a lot to gain from this. So, Chief, with the announcement of digital bank license last year, then open banking as well last year, what new initiatives can we expect from MAS looking forward?
That's well, Ravi Menon announced few things, right? He announced of all the announcement. Particularly where I'm interested more is the Green Print platform, because what that platform will do, it will provide you rich data set to start deploying in Singapore market green product. One thing digital banks should think ahead of anybody is to start thinking what kind of product I can launch next year, which will have the green angle. And because individual responsibility and green in climate change is far more than institutional responsibility. If they can find a smart way to educate and target segment of customer, telling that we are all collectively responsible for climate change, and here are the product where you can contribute with some creative design, creative thinking, can give them a huge edge in this space. That's one. So we have deployed a green platform to allow that happen. So that's something you can look forward to. Second, we also introduced something called CheckFin. Well, that is almost an accidental discovery over a dinner in Tanjung Roh, where we were struggling to establish a credential between fintechs and the banks to work together. And that particular platform, which you all have to look at, provides remarkable opportunity for people to build their own credibility without depending on somebody's institutional support. And that can help to make the digital bank adopt more technology. And you don't need to call Varun Mittal or me or somebody, hey, can you introduce to this bank? Because that platform gives you unbiased opportunity for people to be able to put their solution in front of the banks. And the third one, I think, is really more exciting. And I don't know where it'll end, is Project Orchid. It is our platform where we'll start thinking what to do SGD, digital currency. I don't know what it means, but we'll see where it goes. And that could be an interesting play, digital currency bundled financial product.
And if I just pick from that, so the potential for digital international currency or stable coin just in Singapore context, Singapore is a massive trade center. You cannot do interbank USD clearing. I still have 6 checkbooks for interbank US dollar movement from a bank branches which are right next to each other. If I do it by a check, it costs me 50 cents. But if I want to do it digitally, it costs me $125 today, if it's a non-Sing dollar transaction. And we're talking all local Singaporean banks. The premise is it's not a technology. Somebody is actually reading that check at the end of the day. I deposit by 1 p.m. Somebody is going to read it at 4:30 p.m. Take a picture of that, send it to the next bank, do an overnight settlement, and it will clear 24 or 48 hours later. There is like zero, there is actually nothing tech per se. It's just that nobody has it, which is where one announcement which Chief missed, which I found more fascinating than all 3 of them, was eGiro. Because if I look at if I'm looking from a customer's perspective, today, till now, it took 3 weeks to set up an eGiro mandate, because a lot of merchants do not want to accept credit cards. Their point is that, okay, this person, so think of it, I'm taking taxi every month, I have, let's say, 15 rides. My taxi service provider is very happy to set up a billing system where instead of the taxi company paying 3% to all of these card players, can combine my bill me at end of month, direct from my bank transfer. Today, it takes 3 weeks to set up, change anything, all paper form cannot do. So the way I look at customer perspective, the fact that eGiro has become digital, Singapore as a country with 14 billion cards spent, and most of it, and a large part of it is through online merchants, digital merchants, marketplaces, the potential of that 3% customer surplus going back into ecosystem and that impacting GDP, and that is something which will start to deliver you results tomorrow. So with all humility, I would say, personally, that one initiative
it was not proper for to say how eGiro is going to change, but Varun just spilled it, but I'm not going to hold myself to that. But yeah, eGiro was designed to make collection process super efficient.
The luxury I have is I can speak up stuff which you cannot.
I'll tell you an anecdote. I was visiting the central bank of one of the countries in Southeast Asia. I won't name it, but at some point, I saw a bunch of people sitting on the floor in the middle of the central bank and with paper in the middle. And so I asked, what is this? And check clearing. And so it's not that long ago. It's a few years ago. But your description is actually not that far from that picture. And so there's an element of potential progress. To your point, Chief, we announced a few days ago a partnership with Starling to do green deposits, meaning allow consumers to deposit money in the digital bank and assign such deposits to green projects of the bank, hence creating green deposits. It's a capability that I'm expecting will be in high demand for frankly any digital bank in the world. So stay tuned for more in the space of sustainability, but completely agree, and it's one of our high conviction themes actually, that sustainability and financial inclusion are business models will be built around this.
I would personally, Alex, I would personally change my bank if a bank offers me a green product. I will do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow if I get a set of product.
Deal.
Would you do it if the green product is going to offer you 50 basis point lower return? Because see, a lot of this point is that I want to be green till the point I don't make less money.
I'm willing to pay a little price for that. And if that can be converted to a green points, which I can carry and say, look, this is my moral contribution, I'm okay.
Hey, that made my day. I just acquired one more client.
Yeah, I guess new segments of clients may be evolving.
So that's what I want Alex to think, that in his new bank, he should deliver this product.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, personally, I would be like, okay, So you see, there are a lot of people who would be nervous to say it on record. They'll be like, okay, I'm not going to make a 50 basis point less return. But again, there's merit to it. But going back to the point which I mentioned, that e-Gyro thing has potential to create billions of dollars of immediate term, not short term, immediate term economic impact. Singapore has one of the largest merchant interchange fees in Southeast Asia. One of the largest. And so we're talking billions of dollars of SMEs getting real value immediate. And all of those initiatives are awesome. But being a capitalist guy, I'm looking at the one which is going to create immediate economic output. And I'm thankful for the e-Gyro.
We can build on that, right? So you're referring to infrastructure more broadly, right? And the point about digital assets, and this is another theme of ours, and you know, a very high conviction too, that digital assets are here to stay. I'm not saying Bitcoin is going up or down. I'm saying digital assets are here to stay, and whether it's check clearing, whether it's international payments, whether it's trade financing, sort of there's a number of use cases for it, you know, not least sustainability and financial inclusion, where digital assets, ultimately DeFi, will have to play a role. We have a job today to build the infrastructure for it. And that will create an ecosystem which will create ultimate adoption, acceptance of it. So the infrastructure play around digital assets is absolutely important here and everywhere else.
I have a question for Alex. Can I do that? Yes, for moderator. You know, I was yesterday sitting having a dinner with the uncle of Bhutan king, and the COPS 26 Gasco just go over chapter 6. I think he was saying some chapter 6 where Bhutan is allowed to trade the 70% deep forest, Bhutan. And for them to economically grow, they have to cut forest. Now they will not cut forest, but you can trade it for green carbon points. His challenge was that I can do that, but I'm actually in a way not going to benefit. And he said that let's assume that Bhutan takes all this carbon, they don't cut the trees, 70% that forest, and that carbon points will be now traded in Singapore against an oil company. He said that doesn't help me because the oil company is going to burn more fuel, my glacier is going to melt, I'll be drowned, I'll be back to same, I'll be worse off, because I may have got a trader, I may have got cash by trading my carbon points, but by that process, I've accelerated my own existence crisis because you're going to increase more temperature and burn this glaciers are going to come down. So the question to you, Alex, is that one of the things we got to think about, and what's your thinking is how to ensure that this carbon trading is not happening against some dubious counterparty who's going to burn more fuel.
Yeah, it's a great point where frankly, it's another idea, another venture which we're working on. I'd characterize it in a word by saying ESG forensics, right? So this market is in dire need at this point of standards and forensics, meaning proper measurement and vetting of counterparties and the likes. And to me, this is an essential piece of infrastructure to enable the next generation carbon trading and frankly everything trading. So absolutely, and there's a business to be built here. Yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting. I guess it seems like the segmentation of clients potentially, what I'm hearing is it could evolve. It's no longer about affluence level, how rich you are, but it could be ESG friendly clients or capitalistic clients, giving them extra interest.
Not mutually exclusive.
You can. Well, I would argue that he's saying that because he never thought that COVID will come, and one fine day this climate come, all this thing he's talking about will wipe out. All the money he thinks he's earning will be irrelevant. His whole family will not exist. So all this nonsense, all this capitalistic people are talking as all nonsense. We have seen in COVID thing. 2 years, nobody expected us to have COVID. Stay in house for 2 years. Social distancing. This is not a social behavior we thought we'll have it on in our lifestyle because we just ignored. And climate is going to be real. We got to stop this habit of earning money for sake of earning money. It has to be responsible.
That's right. Varun, very interesting point. And we have actually covered one question that's on everybody's mind. It's like all the banks are facing tremendous pressure from clients like yourself, fed up with checkbooks and the processes, and they'll be demanding more and more digital services, capabilities, processes, pricing. What do you think the equipment banks can do more? I mean, the infrastructure is there. MES has set up eGiro. A lot of infrastructure is very progressive. But what do you think the banks, equipment banks, can do?
Stop deciding for me. That's a simple thing. Do not decide for me.
Sure.
You
Web 3.0.
simple. It's like this, right? Netflix has a recommendation page for me, but they do not define what I watch.
Yes.
Today I'm in a mood for a comedy movie, even though last week was all war movies. So you show me all war movies, but today I'm in a comedy mood, so I can just change, and it's my decision. And in beautiful part is, my family members have their own sub accounts and profiles, which are very different, which are part of the same account, which is technically part of the same account, but they're separate profiles. The way I look at is, stop deciding for me. You define your products, define your capabilities, and then let me do it my way. You can have your recommendations. I respect it. I may use some of them, but stop creating artificial labels for me.
It's true. I've been stereotyped in Netflix as a horror shows fanatic. Everything is zombie. All the recommendation shows were zombie. Even though I'm in a good mood, sometimes it's still horror movies.
Oh, poor you. For you. It's an interesting point, right? So plug for human-centered design here, which is
Bank should read Varun's mind and think he's looking for comedy today. Let's show him comedy.
Yeah. No, but it goes back to serving you or addressing your needs, the way you want it to be served, right? Which is so you want recommendation, you want guidance, you want me to use some data on you to make such recommendation. You don't want me to decide for you, and you want that.
I'll give you a very simple example. Pick any bank. They have 5 or 6 different cards. One is an online shopping card. One is travel card. One is local spend card. Allah, I'm one person. I do all of them. I keep 5 cards. You expect me to remember. Why can't you just have one card? And based on when I do a transaction, it is a.
I got a solution. Cardspal. You find it in iOS. Cardspal. It's a great app. We all know it's a national sport here to walk around with 25 credit cards and optimize your benefits on it. Like 50 meters down the road, you get a 10% discount on your HSBC card or City1, etc. Cardspal optimizes it all, solves the problem. Available on iOS today. Yeah.
So you see, premises, what it's trying to do is, it is trying to work with a artificially created inefficiency. See, it's a hack to solve which is why some fintechs, for example, they said, we understand, so we will give you, so you can choose your behavior, that what do you prioritize, and it's one card, and bank knows this is my travel transaction, this is my this. What do you want as a bank? You want your card to be my top of wallet. That's what you actually want. Fine, let make my life easier for me to ensure you are top of this. You give me one card and give me all those behaviors in that same thing. You don't need to artificially give me 5 plastics.
And I'll bring it back, other than my shameless plug for Cardspal, which is a venture of ours and applies here. I think everything we're discussing here, actually back to the point we were discussing earlier, is around lifestyle.
That's right.
It's around lifestyle. It's financial services as embedded or applied to lifestyle, as opposed to, we talked about Netflix, we talked about cards, we talked about, and that's what people are interested in, right?
That's right. Thanks for summing up, Alex. Actually, it's important that banks are paying. It's important for banks to start paying attention to what consumer really want and not decide for them what they think they need. So increasingly, I think a lot of propositions will be built around more customer-centric, ESG friendly, or interest rate pricing friendly, etc.
Convictions.
Yeah.
Convictions.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's right. That's right.
Customer-centric is too old school. Customer-obsessed is the new normal.
And thanks, Varun. And thanks so much. We're running a bit short on time. Thanks, Chief Varun and Alex, for this great discussion. And I'm sure a lot of our audience have benefited from your insights and on this, and looking forward to this new norm. And I would like to open now to the floor from questions from the audience, physically here or virtually here for our speakers. We have around 10 minutes to do so. And you can just post in any questions that you might have. Okay. Is there any questions?
Coming to your screen.
Yes, I'm checking now. Okay, it's still coming in, but in the meantime, I guess while we wait for more questions coming in, I do have one question as well. We talk about the whole customer centricity of propositions surrounding clients, to be more customer centric, and of course, there are many fintechs that may have not applied for digital bank license, and some do. I mean, there's a lot that haven't, but they're already disrupting certain businesses, banking business. And I'm looking forward. It's always on my mind. How will all this? There's a big. I mean, we've addressed that. There's a big segment that's underserved, and then there is a lot of new propositions coming out to capture those space to serve those clients that have not been, the banks, incumbent banks have not been paying attention to. Looking for, how do you foresee the whole digital banks, digital banking, and fintechs to coexist together in this new norm? I mean, that with all this data, open banking, everything's coming together as a new norm. How do you think they can coexist together? We did cover about the instance where Chief mentioned is about Google, when Google came up, it started being very transparent. Some non-performing banks will be more evident than the good performing ones. But how will this play out together?
See, the premise is this, right? You need to be a bank when you want to lend. If all you want to do is to give transactional services, you don't need to be a bank. And if you look at the valuation multiples of a bank versus a non-bank in a transactional business, it's actually profitable. It's better to be not carrying a banking license. The amount of stuff it comes with it and strings which comes with this it's not funny. So unless you wanted to get into lending, no need to get a banking license.
Story of my life. Story of my life.
So which is why if you want to get into lending is a different ball game, then absolutely. So my view is there is a lot that if I look at a customer's life, there's a lot more to my life than borrowing money. Right, so you can do a lot of that without a banking license. A lot of fintechs who believe that they can create value in lending, of course, they should get a banking license. Of course, they could do without it also with some limitations. So my premise is the world will be pure transactional services, whether it's wealth, whether it's purchasing insurance and stuff. And then there is a lending, and then the product manufacturing. So companies which are manufacturing insurance, manufacturing assets and stuff. So the word will crystallize into some of those words, and everybody will pick their specialization. And yes, there will be some conglomerates which will be trying to do everything to some varying degree of success.
See, the human brain likes to put things in categories and very strict labels on it. So there's bank X, bank Y, they're both banks, and therefore they compete against each other, right? And this technology company XYZ, they provide services, therefore one is a supplier to the other. The ecosystem which Chief was describing earlier is one where perhaps those labels aren't that firm, and the distinctions are a little blurred. So they may well be a world where different members of the ecosystem compete against each other, cooperate with each other, partner with each other, which isn't quite the same thing, are clients of each other. And what's going to be super confusing is they could be doing all these things in the same time, sometimes in the same market, sometimes in different markets, sometimes for different products or different client segments. And we just have to be prepared with, for that sort of new normal, where the labels aren't that firm, and actors will move around and cross lines and be a lot more nimble at the way they interact with each other.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, we are seeing this as we speak. A lot of banks have started to go into lifestyle, as you mentioned. DBS even came out saying bank less, live life. They want to be a part of your lifestyle ecosystem. And we have one question that came in. Varun mentioned about lending, but this is about the cards business. In the digital banking future, how about the trend of card business, especially credit cards?
See, the premise is this, right? credit card is just an instrument, right? It doesn't matter whether you don't need a card per se. You can now go to an ATM and withdraw directly from your bank app. So card is just a way. You're doing it with a wearable. You're doing it tomorrow. You will have with your eye retina. You can just blink and you can have. So that is just a form factor. Form factors evolve, keep coming. Now I see rings also being used to do. Form factors evolve. The key part is how do you change the product? Inherently, credit card product has not changed in last 20 years. It's exactly same what it was 20 years ago. What is, you need to change the underlying engine. The front chassis is okay. The underlying engine is an opportunity to tweak.
So we announced Zai a few days ago. Zai is a result of the merger of Assembly Payments and Currency Fair, and you should think of it as a gateway of gateways, meaning really it doesn't matter what payment system you use. It's about making it easy for merchants to aggregate any form of payment, and back to Varun's point about Netflix, letting a consumer choose which is your preferred means of payment. And you know, it could be this card, that card, or not a card, Apple Pay, UPI if you're in India, or you know, Pay Now here, and whichever. But aggregating these means of payments, it's an essential piece of infrastructure for the online economy, because that, you know, the equivalent of that POS, you know, that physical little thing at a shop on a website, is going to have a lot more, a lot better, essentially, at integrating different forms of payments and make it seamless and transparent from a consumer perspective, so you can choose. Doesn't matter.
That's right. Thanks so much, Alex. In fact, the consumers, one key thing, it's about trust and transparency. So many different cards with different pricing. You have to call 25 cards, you have to call in for 25 waivers every year. That's quite frustrating. So customer centricity is a key thing. Looks like we run short of time for more questions, but we definitely covered a lot this morning pertaining to the future of digital banking and digital-only banks. And we have to reach a close to this session. And once again, I'd like to thank our panel speakers, Mr. Sunendo Moharty, Varun,